Hi everyone. It's my first time here at the International Conference on Night Studies. So I've spent quite a few years thinking about the night already because my PhD was about nocturnal cultures of 18th century London and how literature represented it. But after finishing that project, I kind of want to look beyond London and to think about the night in a more transnational framework. So I started to ask how global exchanges reshape the ways in which we experienced and imagined the night. And this is how I arrived at Opium, which is one of the key protagonists in the history of exchange between Britain and China. Um, yeah, so unlike coffee or tea, the stimulants I had previously studied in my PhD, opium actually is often it's not we don't usually talk about the role in like extending wakefulness like coffee and tea, but it's more associated with inducing sleep. The Latin name of its source plant actually also means sleep-inducing, and the Romans considered it as a symbol of sleep and death. On the other hand, the Arabs used opium as a painkiller, and they developed the production and also the trade of opium, which had existed ever since. It was in the 17th century that the volume of medical drugs imported to England exploded, and this also included opium, which was consumed by many people to cope with pain or insomnia at night. And the very famous Samuel Johnson also, he was an occasional opium user, and he used it to cure his headaches and stomach problems. Then in the 19th century, opium was actually embedded in the fabric of daily life, especially among the poor people of London. With its pain-killing effects, it became the main ingredient of many medicines and could be bought in any grocer's or druggist's shop by the 1850s. Many people from the underclass relied on this drug to temporarily escape the miseries of their real life. For example, the working class men, they reverted to the opium to calm their fears of insecurity and poverty. And women used it to numb the family's grinding poverty. And in the case of the sex workers, they used it to counteract the misery of their profession. Um, However, the relationship between opium and sleep is far more complex. As a modern opium eater describes in his autobiography, the effect of opium eating on sleep is actually a paradoxical mix. He said that you get both relaxed and energetic at the same time. Problems become unimportant. You feel sleepy, but if you go to bed, you lie awake. So the effect of taking opium cannot be reduced to mere relaxation. The initial calmness it produces is often accompanied by a sudden rush of excitement, or sometimes nausea. And then it is followed by a phase of self-assurance, like I can do anything in the world, and then a listless complacency. Many addicts in their early stage reported having increased mental power, which led them to believe that they were generating very unique ideas. So it was this kind of paradox, a kind of suspension between drowsiness and wakefulness, between reality and hallucination, that fascinated a lot of literary writers. For example, at the turn of the 19th century, opium was instrumental in the development of Romanticism and their ideal. Writers like Thomas de Quincey writes about the psychological effect of opium in his work, where he describes this kind of experience of suddenly opening and lighting up, a theater suddenly opened and light up within my brain, which presented nightly spectacles of more than earthly splendor. Yet, the imagination of opium was not confined to the internal theater of the mind. In the 19th century, the theme of opium addiction was often linked to the irrational, chaotic aspects of London's nocturnal spaces, shaping how night was imagined and represented. Writers such as Charles Dickens and Arthur Conan Doyle mapped opium onto the labyrinthine streets of nocturnal London, often depicting London's East End opium dens as exotic, shadowy heterotopias, which means sites of addiction, criminality, and oriental otherness. Dickens starts his final novel, it is his last novel, The Mystery of Edwin Drood, with a depiction of the protagonist John Jasper's liminal state between dream and consciousness. Jasper is woken to a very small room where lies a Chinaman, a Lascar, and a haggard woman. According to these women, Jasper has smoked as many as 5 doses of opium since he comes in at midnight, a sign of his uninhibited indulgence throughout the night. Under the influence of opium, night transforms from a time of rest into something of hallucination, evasion, and addiction, exemplifying what scholars call the colonization of the night, which means the process by which nocturnal time and space are used and reshaped by new forms of behavior and control. There are also descriptions of Jasper noting, perhaps through his hallucinations, how the woman has opium smoked herself into a strange likeness of the Chinaman. This kind of orientalization of the female body here implies an anxiety over the erosion of domestic bodies by Oriental drugs. And this is a recurring trope in the imperial discourse of this period. So chapter 1 of Dickens' novel ends with an afternoon scene in which Jasper arrives at an old cathedral and gets on his white robe to join the choir. The sharp contrast between this Foucauldian heterotopia of the nocturnal opium den and the orderly religious space of daylight underscores how the site of addiction becomes a nexus of moral corruption, of social marginality, and imperial exoticism. And this kind of dichotomization achieves its most dramatic effect in Doyle's short story, The Man with the Twisted Lip. In this story, he describes a cripple, a hideous cripple, who is a professional beggar, turns out to be a gentleman who has been reported to be missing. Disguised as a beggar during the day and back to his decent life after dark, this man lives a kind of double life that embodies what Dickens called the city's simultaneous allure and repulsion. So it's both attractive and repulsive. The opium den, located deep within London's shadowy streets, is where the beggar safely removes his disguise, a shelter for criminal and transgressive activities in the nocturnal city. Unlike the first chapter of Dickens' novel, where the protagonist wakes up already within the den, Doyle here takes his readers on a journey through the nocturnal city, leading them down many steps to finally the den he called a black gap, like the mouth of a cave. So he's evoking the thrill of descending into the abyss. Inside the den, he describes bodies lying in strange, fantastic poses. And by fragmenting human figures into these isolated body parts, Doyle is underscoring the hallucinatory and the dehumanizing effects of opium, which dissolves people's individuality and reduces people to mere physical forms. So the den here is imagined once again as a very exotic and racialized space, populated by a Malay attendant and the Lascar who runs it. The magnification of the opium den into a cavern of nocturnal dissipation in late Victorian fiction was very closely tied to the growing anxiety over the harmfulness of opium smoking, which culminated at the turn of the century in a very powerful anti-opium movement. And some reformers at that time were genuinely disturbed by Britain's role in the opium trade with China and by the need to use military force to enforce this trade. Organizations such as the British Society for the Suppression of the Opium Trade sought to publicize the devastating consequences of opium in China and also elsewhere in Asia. However, this movement was far from being merely driven by this humanitarian outrage. Domestically, they also were very active in disseminating the belief that opium smoking was somehow threatening in its implications for the local population as well. In their attempt to dramatize its dangers, they distinguished opium smoking from other forms of consumption and deliberately associated it with the Asian people, especially the Chinese, and circulated the alarmist stories about the filthy opium dens and the ways British people were lured into them. Such narratives reveal that the campaign was often less about moral reckoning for the imperial violence abroad than about anxieties over the contamination at home. So an inspector, for example, visited London's Chinese area and its opium dens in 1904, and he concluded that Oriental cunning and cruelty was hallmarked on every countenance. Narratives like this not only fueled racial stereotypes, but also exposed the fears of the imperial backwash, whereby the very commodity Britain exported to control others was imagined as returning to threaten themselves. However, as some contemporaries show, the reality might be less contained. A reporter of the Morning Advertiser described the East End of London he saw as not repulsive, but calm and peaceful. And another visitor to the Chinatown in the 1870s admitted that as for the so-called dens, they seemed to me simply poorly fitted social clubs. So this suggests that the stigmatized opium dens in East London might have been more akin to nocturnal social clubs for the Chinese laborers than the so-called abyss of depravity often depicted in contemporary discourse. If anti-opium discourse in Britain was marked by a tension between imperial guilt and domestic anxiety, the story unfolded very differently on the other side of the empire, which I mean in China. As the editors of opium regimes, China, Britain, and Japan observe, without opium, Chinese history in the 19th and 20th centuries would have been far different. However, in the past 2 decades, scholars have questioned the long-standing narrative of China as the victim of this kind of opium plague. For example, there is a book called Narcotic Culture, A History of Drugs in China, challenges the victimization paradigm, arguing that in most cases, habitual opium use did not have significant harmful effects on people's health. Some other scholars have critically dismissed this benign view of opium. They dismiss it as cynical hypocrisy because they note that the ban on opium importation into Britain in 1856 already revealed that there existed a double standard. And they emphasize that opium consumption in late Qing China actually they continually expanded and deepened, transforming from medicine to mass drug food as the patterns of consumption altered and demand increased and the understanding of opium use changed. So here I'm following Homi Bhabha's theorization of the colonial desire for a reformed, recognizable other. And I argue that through the opium trade, Britain actually did not merely export a commodity, but also a regime that rendered the Chinese bodies and their nocturnal habits legible, governable, and also morally available for intervention. Even where habitual use did not result in very terrible health outcomes, opium was, we can see it as a material force that reshaped nocturnal rhythms, people's social practices, and urban spaces on a very large scale. And such kind of temporal and spatial reconfiguration, which I term as the colonization of the night, is itself a mode of domination. As previously discussed, opium smoking disrupted people's circadian rhythms by keeping the addicts awake in their sleeping hours. And many contemporary Chinese accounts actually described how the drug changed one's habits of sleep, making it very difficult to fall asleep in the early parts of the night owing to the mental excitement induced by the drug. And Alan Baumler describes in Modern China and Opium that what opium did to people's temporal rhythms was captured by a popular saying at that time that opium smoking makes the day night and the night day. This also find expression in some literary works at that time. For example, a poem published by Symbolic, which means Shanghai News, on 19th August 1872, evokes the nocturnal atmosphere of the late Qing Shanghai opium culture. And here you can see night becomes not a time for rest, but one of wakefulness and sensory indulgence. It is a realm colonized by addiction. Besides altering people's nocturnal rhythms and transforming night from a time of repose into something of infatuation, the extensive commercialization of opium in the late 19th and early 20th centuries also reshaped the spaces and the social activities of the Chinese night, reflecting the role opium played in the imperial project of reconfiguring urban modernity. According to 户游杂记, which means miscellaneous notes on wandering in Shanghai, from 1860s on, Shanghai became known as home to the finest opium dance on the heaven. And there is a report in Shenbao noted that by the 1870s, there were over 1,700 opium houses within the city walls, almost as numerous as the tea houses, taverns, and eateries. Popular across different social ranks, opium houses became an integral part of Shanghai's urban nightlife, and it caters to consumers from diverse backgrounds, as you can see from the quotation on the slide. The transformation of the nocturnal cityscape was perhaps most obvious and palpable in its sensescapes, which means the sensory dimension of the urban landscape. One of the most striking nocturnal experiences was to visit the so-called flower opium dance, 花烟馆, which means which was a special type of opium house combining prostitution with opium smoking. A contemporary newspaper described the interior as a single green lamp lit the couch where clouds of smoke were inhaled and exhaled, and where carnal pleasures were also pursued. The air was thick with odors, so much so that even enthusiasts would pass by and cover their noses. You can see that even through this kind of journalistic writing, it is not difficult to see how such places become sites where sensual pleasure and narcotic indulgence were intimately intertwined. So to conclude, my presentation today, by introducing a temporal spatial model, has proposed a new approach to understanding the exchange between China and Britain in the 19th and early 20th centuries. Through the opium trade, British colonial power not only facilitated China's economic and political subjugation, but also reshaped the ways in which Chinese people experienced the dark hours. Opium, both as a commodity and an imagery, stood at the intersection of Britain's imperial imagination and what I term the colonization of the night. Colonization here operates through a dual framework. On the one hand, it refers to the spatial and geopolitical domination enacted by Britain through the opium trade. And on the other, it is a temporal colonization in which addictive commodities like opium reconfigured the rhythm of people's everyday life, particularly at night, by imposing new cycles of activities and wakefulness. To trace this kind of colonization of the night, therefore, is to uncover an very much overlooked dimension of imperial modernity, which is a governance of time itself. So this is the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
Okay, Ling-I, and I'm delighted to be joining the Night Studies Network for the first time. I'm joining from Taiwan, where it's currently midnight. It feels quite fitting to be discussing the night in the middle of the night. I'll be presenting on the topic of geopolitics of night. The sky is bright and the earth is dark, yet on certain places, darkness must fall upon the sky, so that the light shimmering along the median of the sea and land can appear. Map is a group of islets that belong to Taiwan but lie just off the coast of China. During the Cold War, the hot conflicts between uh, China and Taiwan were tangibly manifested on these border islands. For more than 2 decades since the late 1950s, shells fired from both sides straight across the sky above the troubled waters, exploding over nearly every inch of the islands. During the nighttime blackout, enemies could slip across the sea at any moment. Known as water ghosts, they stroke from the darkness. Darkness means danger. The fear of it lasts long after the war. For many people, darkness brought back memories of war, something they wanted to forget and leave behind. Perhaps that is why these remote islands have so many streetlights. Their brightness not only guides people home, but also light away from war toward peace and prosperity. In recent years, a kind of green plankton has started to bloom off the coast of China each spring, then slowly drifts across the sea to reach mountains. When the waves crash against the shore, these tiny organisms give off a soft blue light, making the water sparkle at night. People here lovingly call them blue tears, as if the ocean itself were rain with shimmering tears. Today, blue tears tourism has become an important part of Mazu's life, helping the islands move beyond their military past toward the future of reconciliation and new beginnings. Unlike the older kind of tourism that focused on war relics and the scars they left behind, blue tears have given islanders a new sense of connection to their sea and land. To see the tears, visitors rely on local people who know the sea by heart. You have to wait for the right weather and go to the right cove, follow a certain path, or even step onto a specific reef to catch the magical glow. The blue tears have turned these once war-torn front lines into a fantasy islands, quiet, secret world shimmering with hidden wonder. But to make this shimmering visible, an environment of sufficient darkness must be created. Building such an atmosphere requires not only physical changes, such as redesigning lightings, but more importantly, a social that reorients local development agendas, shifting from the old views of darkness as war and light as prosperity. Dark sky advocates are working to reframe this understanding through networks that create new meanings of development. Their efforts include broadening the idea of ecological friendliness by linking it with firefly conservation and connecting with slow life movement that encourage more mindfulness of traveling, consuming, and living as an integral part of the local development strategy. In 2021, the local council took the unprecedented step of enacting Taiwan's first light pollution control ordinance, which designated light sensitive zones in Matsu and introduced penalties for violations. Today, there is a growing awareness in Matsu that preserving darkness has become essential to the island's unique appeal. However, the shifting interplay between light and darkness have given rise to a new forms of contest. People in nearby regions have begun to ask if similar algae can be seen elsewhere. Why should Matsu alone monopolize the economic value of the glowing sea? This emerging economy of spectacles has turned the subtle light into a lucrative commodity that different places now compete on the Chinese side. Pintan Island, located just south of Matsu, has in recent years promoted its own version of fantasy light tourism, benefiting from high-speed rail and superhighway connection. Pintan can more easily attract domestic tourists from all across China without the need for cross-border permits required to visit Matsu. This growing competition, along with the surge of tourism and investment, has put increasing pressure on both the ocean and the islands. But the greatest threat has come unexpectedly. The new enemy are those who bring light. In recent years, an increasing number of fishing boats have appeared in the water around Matsu, using powerful lights to attract squid at night. This high and intensity lights illuminates both the sea and the sky reflected upon it, turning the night almost as bright as day. The self-illuminating squid boat have created a darker version of the squid that casts a shadow, or more precisely, an aurora over Mazu. Yet this aurora dims not only the visibility of the blue tears, but also the island's hope for prosperity. The light pollution control audience can manage light on the islands, but not on but not at sea. The glow from the fishing boats comes from Chinese waters, where the Mazu authorities have no control. As uh, dynamics of the new Cold War continue to unfold, geopolitical tensions between China and Taiwan have once again intensified. In fact, war has never been far away. The context over blue tears among the border islands reflects, on the one hand, the resurgence of political friction, but on the other hand, they have also sparked a shared environmental concern. The same conditions that sustained Mazu's clean mind equally enable the developmental ambition of coastal China. This case reveals the agency of light and darkness. The emerging development agenda centered on the pursuit of deeper darkness to reveal enchanted light resonate with eco-friendly ways of living. It diverges from the developmentalism embedded in statist and nationalist discourses that have long dominated in East Asia. More importantly, this transformation reconfigured life and space in ways that defied prediction or easy interpretation. They introduced confusion and disorientation into established orders and categories. They render the categories of history, culture, economy, politics, and ecology blurred and ambiguous. The geopolitics of light thus produced a landscape that is at once a site of memory and forgetting, conservation and destruction, reconciliation and conflict. Such a moment of epistemic disruption, as Walter McNaughton's concept of border thinking suggests, unleashed the colonial potential of a knowledge geographic reconfiguration. The geopolitics of light reassembles oceans like islands and sky, and reassembles the human with non-human. I believe this ongoing struggle stressed new lights on the meaning of the geo in geopolitics. It compels us to perceive geopolitics not merely through states or capitals, but through illuminated ways and skies, offering a chance to rethink existing borders, categories, and framework, even as this light continue to linger just beyond our control. Okay, my presentation stop here. Thank you.